Hey guys, I'm John and welcome to Respect Your Intellect. One of the things that I haven't seen properly explored when it comes to conspiracy theories, especially the flat earth, is the methods of thinking that are used in comparison with science. So in this video, we're going to be dissecting and comparing scientific reasoning versus conspiracy theorist reasoning, as well as categorizing each as what they really are. Let's get started. Even more fundamental than the scientific method is critical thinking. So let's start by establishing what it is, how it works, and go through an example. Critical thinking is pretty loose in its definition, and you can find some different processes that all essentially do the same thing. Establish a way of thinking that's based on logic, rationality, skepticism, and an unbiased analysis of factual evidence. It's also self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. Let's take a look at how this process would generally unfold. Here, I'm presenting a process that has 5 steps, and each step has a specific function. This process is usually extremely fast once you start thinking along those lines. We're talking seconds here for most everyday things. The first step is reasoning. In this step, we're going to be analyzing something in a logical way. We don't want any opinions or biases here. We only want an objective assessment of whatever's in question. The second step is evaluating. This is where we'll form our own idea about the problem based on what we established in the first reasoning step. The third step is problem solving. Here, we need to think about solutions to the problem if something went wrong during evaluation, and if something needs to be addressed. The fourth step is decision making. At this point, we need to objectively assess if we made progress since the original statement was made. If we have a better logical and unbiased explanation, we'll continue with that. Otherwise, we're either okay with the original statement or we don't have a solution to the problem we established. The fifth step is analyzing. This is the step where we determine if there are still problems or if we can accept where we're at. If there are still problems, we need to continue the process until we have a green analysis. Or we admit that we need to find help to answer our remaining questions because we can't find anything that makes enough sense on our own. If there are no longer any problems, then it's still solid enough to stick with that until we identify a new problem. So let's go through an example of this process of critical thinking to better understand how it would go. Note that this is a self-driven process that everyone should be doing on their own to analyze every statement they come across. This part is just about your own logical way of thinking and not about proving or falsifying anything just yet. We'll have the scientific method for that a bit later. Let's start with a random person who hears a claim that the earth is flat. This person needs to go into this cycle of critical thinking and try to analyze what's being presented. So first comes the reasoning step, where we immediately see a red flag because reality doesn't seem to agree with that statement. First, there's a rush of scientific facts that come to mind that would not allow for a flat earth. Second, there's no chance that such a conspiracy would last through several millennia. Third, there are tons of satellites in orbit with verifiable information, specifically our GPS system. Fourth, there are lots of space companies in the private sector that couldn't exist if space wasn't real because shareholders would never agree to it. Fifth, the spherical shape of the Earth already respected its burden of proof over 2,300 years ago when it was first presented, and was able to dethrone the geocentric model and withstand millennia of testing. We could go on here, but as I said before, there's an immense rush of problems here that all seem to greatly disagree with the statement that the Earth is flat. Next comes the evaluation portion. First, we can ask ourselves if the Earth could be any other shape than a sphere. Well, the answer to that is no, for the simple fact that at those scales, everything tending towards the center of mass will always form a sphere because it's the only stable shape at those scales. Second, we can ask ourselves what the motive would be behind this lie. Well, the answer to that is that there's really no motive at all for it. Even if it was just about money, there's a lot more problems that arise from this if you think critically about that all on its own. The main one is that this money comes from the people, it has to be approved by countless government officials, and it doesn't enrich NASA at all since they expense most of it, so there would be no point. So now it's time to problem solve. We can identify at this point that the original statement that the Earth is flat comes with way too many unsurmountable problems, and something needs to be fixed. This means we can't accept the original statement as it was, so we have to come up with something else. Next is the decision-making portion. In this case, we know that the spherical shape works for all scenarios we've ever heard since our childhood, so it's already very solid and it's safe to continue with that. We don't have to reimagine any other shape at this point because this entire cycle is all centered on the original statement that the Earth is flat that we can't accept. And lastly, we have the analysis portion. First, we don't see any problems with the Earth being a sphere, but if we lack some specific knowledge on why, we can take note to look into it later. Second, there are dozens upon dozens of scientific fields that all agree with each other, so it looks like the entire world is in agreement about the spherical shape. Third, we have pictures taken of the Earth every day now that show the spherical shape of the Earth, both in composited formats and single frames, and neither of those are CGI. Fourth, we have private space companies that are very transparent and public and let us come along with them on their journey as they push the boundaries. This includes even when things don't go as planned. So this was one round of critical thinking when it's properly applied. Logic and rationality are the main components of critical thinking, and the result is that we refuse to accept that statement. So now let's look at the method of reasoning of a conspiracy theorist, namely flat earthers. We'll go with the same claim that the Earth is flat. So the first step is reasoning. Instead of using logic here for analyzing the statement, they simply ask themselves, do I like it or do I not like it? The second step is evaluation. So here they'll be asking themselves, does it make me happy and does it make me feel special? The third step is problem solving. Here they'll ask themselves, can I answer this myself with something I already heard someone say? It's worth noting here that this is where their experience lies, by just how much they've memorized and are able to repeat without any regard to other aspects of reality. The fourth step is decision making. For this step, if they already heard someone give an answer to something, even though it doesn't make any sense, they might just go with that. If they can't answer it themselves by repeating what someone else said, they'll instead try to improvise an answer by making something up on the spot. This is the root of their inconsistency. When they improvise, they also have no regard for if it matches well with other points or other aspects of reality. It's just about a very narrow view of the topic at hand. If they don't know and can't improvise, then the only remaining avenue is denial. When they reach this step of denial, there's no limit to what they'll deny, even if it makes up the majority of reality and everything that's observed on a daily basis. The final step is analysis. For this step, it's very simple for them. As long as they answered something other than I don't know, no matter how nonsensical their answer was, they'll throw their arms up in victory and shout it from a mountaintop. For a good example of this, you can go see my 20 Questions Flat Earthers Can't Answer series. On that series, they claimed they destroyed the globe, but they didn't even actually answer half of the questions, and the rest was all completely ridiculous answers that were all dissected to show how they can't work. So this here was the first comparison of using the most basic way of thinking logically and rationally that we call critical thinking. As you can see, their mindset is focused on feeling special and confirming their pre-existing beliefs. Reality doesn't really play a role in their decisions of what to believe. This comes from a sense of powerlessness and lack of control in their own lives, so they seek to regain some of that control by determining their reality based on what gives them importance and meaning. Once they fall into that trap, they're much more likely to believe other conspiracies as well and start spiraling down. This obviously creates many problems in their lives and sets them apart from society. This forms groups of like-minded individuals that clump up together and encourage each other, making it that much harder to leave later on. These groups also tend to see patterns where there are none and make completely ludicrous connections to try and solidify their positions, such as connecting flight numbers to dates of events, to construction dates, to the amount of people that were negatively impacted, etc. So part of me thinks it's sad that people resort to this, but part of me sympathizes as well, since they're essentially in a hole with a rope available but zero arm strength. So now let's step into scientific reasoning and go through the same kind of comparison. When it comes to scientific reasoning, there are different processes that can be used depending on the situation. There are three main methods of reasoning in science, which are deductive, inductive, and abductive reasoning. Each of those can branch off into more specific methods of reasoning for different situations and different fields of science. All of them are based on critical thinking, so that rationality and logic are centric, but done in a way that makes the evidence speak for itself to eliminate all human biases. So let's start with an example of abductive reasoning that turns into inductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is when we make an observation and come up with the most likely explanation for it. One example would be coming home to find trash on your floor and coming to the conclusion that your dog is responsible since he was alone. This can yield a fairly good degree of certainty, but usually evolves into inductive reasoning to increase the degree of certainty even further. Inductive reasoning is when we gather data and work backwards to establish accurate premises to explain the data. One example would be looking at thousands upon thousands of swans to establish that they're always white. This can yield an extremely high degree of certainty with millions of data points in the set, but we can't guarantee it will never be falsified with inductive reasoning. If we want to guarantee a conclusion, we need to find ways to go into deductive reasoning that yields answers that are absolutely guaranteed, but we'll leave deductive reasoning out of this example. So for this example, we'll use the following process for the scientific method. We'll examine a solution and make an observation. From there, we'll come up with general premises that try to explain the observation. Those premises will be considered the predictions that we make following the observation. Then we'll move on to inductive reasoning, where we gather specific data to test the predictions. If the predictions are validated to be correct, then our degree of certainty for the premises will increase. Otherwise, we'll need to rework the premises and cycle through again until we get something that can make accurate predictions. So let's start with the original claim that the Earth is flat from back when there was no established scientific method of reasoning. First comes the observation that the Earth looks flat. Back then, it was simply accepted because it looked that way, and they didn't have many tools to test anything. They also had just about zero information about the universe. This is all at a time when simple thunderstorms were thought to be gods showing their anger. But this is essentially our starting point. The Earth was believed to be flat because it looked that way at a glance, and there was no scientific framework established to challenge the view. Then in ancient Greece, a claim was made that the Earth was spherical in shape. In those days, we had deductive reasoning documented, but inductive and abductive reasoning would not be invented for about 1800 more years. Even though it wasn't documented, the process still happened along those lines, so let's take a look at it. First came the observations. Aristotle saw that boats were disappearing bottom first, and mountains could appear half hidden as if they were rising directly from the sea. Then he identified which constellations could be seen in the sky and which could not when moving further and further away from the equator. He also observed that the Earth's shadow during lunar eclipses was always round, and a sphere is the only shape that always casts a round shadow regardless of the angle. Then he formulated the premise that the Earth must be a sphere based on those three things he observed. Next came time to gather data to test the predictions. Eratosthenes did that using the measurement of shadows between Alexandria and Syene at the summer solstice. This allowed him to calculate the circumference of the Earth for the first time. Now at this point, the predictions were validated to be correct, and the Earth was then accepted to be spherical in shape. However, this experiment had to be performed again later with 3 locations instead of 2 to completely eliminate the possibility of a local sun on a flat plane. This served as even more evidence to solidify the claim that the Earth is spherical, because it's the only reasonable shape that can explain the shadows at 3 locations. From that point, no one worthy of note believed that the Earth was flat, even though they still believed at the time that the Earth was still at the center of the universe. So now let's compare to today's flat earther reasoning for the claim that the Earth is flat. First are the observations. They see that the horizon seems flat. They establish that we don't feel a spin or speed. And they say that space doesn't seem realistic or that it's unreasonable. So then they need to come up with the general premises for these observations. The first is that all scientists lied for several millennia until recent governments formed and continued lying to us for money. The second is that all pictures that show sphericity are fake. The third is that everything that's space-related is fake. The fourth is that everyone in the world that speaks of space or the Earth being spherical in shape is being paid to say it. This list goes on with a multitude of completely unreasonable points just like this. Then comes the time to gather data to test their premise that the Earth is flat. For this, we'll use the experiments that they themselves performed on the Behind the Curve documentary so that they can't deny their own people's intentions. The first test was a laser gyroscope to test for the rotation of the Earth, which would be expected to be 0 on a motionless plane. The second was a test for curvature over a certain distance with holes of equal height in wooden boards that a laser should be able to shine through if the Earth was flat. The result here is that their premises of the Earth being flat were falsified by both experiments. The gyroscope registered a 15°/hour drift that's consistent with the spinning globe. Bob Nodell, who performed the test, was also recorded saying to keep it a secret because it could be really bad for the flat Earth movement, showing who's really willing to lie to everyone. So instead of reworking the premises as we do with the scientific method, he instead tried to find other ways to make the results work in his favor. He of course failed to do that because rotation was always detected. As for the curvature test, the results also showed curvature, but instead of admitting it and reworking the premises as he's supposed to do, he instead waited to be off camera with no one watching to say he performed the experiment again and proved flatness. If you use some critical thinking here, you should be asking yourself why he didn't record the test that proves flatness if he's being honest about that. It would make him famous. Everything that flat earthers do that simply aims at degrading the globe rather than prove flatness is not respecting the burden of proof of science. It's up to the party that makes the claim to supply evidence for that claim. The claim for the globe did this successfully well over 2 entire millennia ago. And as Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and flat earthers have no such extraordinary evidence. So now the last thing I want to compare is something that conspiracy theorists use very often and very loosely, and that's science versus pseudoscience. Let's start with science, which relies on falsification. In science, it's the inability to disprove something that makes it solid. Einstein said it very well when he said, "No amount of experimentation can ever prove me right, but a single experiment can prove me wrong." After over 100 years, he's still proven to be correct every time we advance science, including the first ever image of a black hole released on April 10th, 2019. So let's go through the falsification process for the flat Earth claim here using scientific falsification. This claim is falsified by gravity and the mass that the Earth needs to have, seismology, the night sky rotations, our seasons, boats, mountains, and buildings over the horizon, measured curvature, surveying, the sun's relative position to us, Foucault pendulums that measure the rotation, and all the celestial objects we can observe, just to name a few. As far as what supports the claim that the Earth is flat, willful ignorance is the only support here. Some things may appear to support the claim at first glance, but it's only if you willfully remain ignorant about those things and close yourself up to learning that you can continue to believe it supports the claim. Also, keep in mind that even though we just listed a few of the falsifications that are available, it only requires a single one for falsification in science. As soon as something is falsified just once, it absolutely needs to be re-examined. So now let's take a look at the claim that the Earth is spherical. There's absolutely nothing that falsifies this statement. The only things that may appear to falsify it are always easily explained once the details are obtained. As for what supports it, well, that's just about every field of natural sciences, and all observations and measurements that are made without error. So now let's take a look at the opposite of the scientific method, which is how conspiracy theorists think, and that's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Confirmation bias also relies on completely ignoring and denying the things that you disagree with. With confirmation bias, here's what you get from the conspiracy theorists. The claim that the Earth is flat is only supported by half measures of uneducated people, rudimentary observations that don't account for a scale, and the Bible, which is a 2,000-year-old text written by shepherds in a world without science. All of those don't count scientifically, but flat earthers use it because they favor it, and it helps to reinforce their pre-existing beliefs. Here's what they're willing to ignore if they find something that seems to support their pre-existing beliefs. All of our history, every astronomer, cosmologist, geologist, seismologist, surveyor, astronaut, and space agencies in the world, just to name a tiny fraction of it. Every space achievement, every picture from space, every satellite, the inner workings of modern technology, and real physical observations that support the globe. They're not looking to falsify anything, so anything that does, they just ignore and deny completely. They'll use even the weakest of arguments to confirm their beliefs and will ignore every finding that opposes them, no matter how strong the evidence is. This is the absolute opposite of science. Critical thinking is the foundation for the scientific method, which in turn aims to remove all human biases and let only the evidence speak for itself. Rigorous attempts are made constantly to continue to try and disprove claims. Just one falsification is enough to convince the scientific field to rethink what's been falsified. Science also encourages evaluation by other experts in the field, and has many well-established methods of reasoning for particular situations, to form a reliable framework that treats all claims equally. The scientific method is the primary thing that's responsible for our modern quality of life and longer lifespans. Science relies on actual data and the ability to make accurate predictions. Physics, astronomy, biology and medicine, botany, chemistry, cosmology, and geology are all examples of actual science. Pseudoscience, on the other hand, discourages critical thinking because it requires belief. Rigorous attempts are made constantly to try and find a single thing that can support the claim, no matter how weak or fleeting, and no matter how many times it's already been falsified. Experimentation is also heavily manipulated and hacked to try and find a false positive. Just one thing that seems to support a claim, even at a quick glance, is used as a victory. Pseudoscience has no well-established methods of reasoning and relies heavily on confirmation bias. Pseudoscience is not responsible for any significant advancement at all in our history or our modern quality of life. One could easily argue that the negatives outweigh the positives when it comes to pseudoscience. Astrology, alternative medicines, religion, creationism, and crop circles are all examples of pseudoscience. As you can see from all this, the flat earth mindset, along with many other conspiracy theories, completely disagrees with science but perfectly agrees with pseudoscience. This puts flat earth in the same boat as astrology, religion, crop circles, and even mythical creatures. None of those have any evidence whatsoever to support their claims, which means that everything is based on unfounded beliefs. On the other hand, science is made up of only things that can't be falsified and hold up to all scrutiny without exception. It's also responsible for our quality of life and all our technology, which even conspiracy theorists have no problem using every day, even if they deny everything that made it happen. I know which of those I'm going with, and you can decide for yourself which one you'll choose, but there is a right and wrong choice here, so I hope you choose the right one. I also hope that some of this will help some of the conspiracy theorists realize that they're on the complete opposite of the spectrum of science. This opposition will never contribute positively to humankind, but rest assured it's never too late to make your way back to society, and we'll be glad to have you back. So what do you think about this? Is there anything you want to add to the conversation? Let me know in the comments. If you want more content just like this, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support the channel, you can visit my Patreon page for more information. For everything else, you can go to respectyourintellect.com and everything will be available there. Until next time, thanks for watching, and remember, respect your intellect.